Exercise 11.3. Now on page 148 they start talking about ornamentation. Little fancy little flourishes you can do. Been around a long time and there's a whole heap of disagreement about how it should be done. I hesitate doing anything on ornamentation because no matter what I say, somebody else can come up and say, nope, ain't done that way, it's got to be this way or something, because there is huge disagreement on how ornamentation is played. However, I'll try and cover it as best as I know how and explain it as I understand it. Your teacher will explain it as they understand it. So however your teacher explains it, that's how you do it while you're with that teacher. You get another teacher some other time and they're probably going to explain it differently and interpret it differently and play it differently. And that's fine. You just do it the way they're telling you to do it. But then finally, after you've had a few teachers, maybe you have a few ideas and the differences and you'll develop your own style. So let's talk about here. It starts out on page 149 with a grace note. Grace notes generally are a little note in front of the main note and they have a slash in front of them. And again, there's a difference of opinion on how they're played. Everyone agrees pretty much that grace notes are played very quickly. Now, some people will say that you play it right before the note, like it's shown here in the first line. It's written here with these two grace notes and here, and they show you the rhythm for it, where the grace note is played right before the beat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. I was taught that way. I was also taught in college that the grace note is better played on the beat. You don't rob the previous note of its value, its length, because of a grace note of another beat. So you play it on the beat. So it's here very quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is how. It's just very quick. It's very quick. Now there's also an interpretation of grace notes where you actually play the two notes at the same time and just release the grace notes. So it would be 1, 2. It's just real quick. And that's way two of doing it. It kind of depends on a lot of stuff. I'm no expert in it, so that's about as far as I can take grace notes. Now here they're also showing two little notes here. Now I was taught when it's two little notes like they're showing here that you usually play them rhythmically as the notes are shown. So they're 16th notes. So I would play the third beat with like two 16th notes and an 8th note. So it's 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4E and a, like so. 1, 2 is how I was taught to play them. Here they're teaching you, showing you, telling you to play them before the beat. Underneath that mess we have what's called an appoggiatura. An appoggiatura is very similar to a grace note, except it doesn't have a line through it. It's a note. And here, it's similar to what I was talking about above with the two little notes. Here, on appoggiatura, you play it rhythmically according to the value of the little note. So if it's an 8th note, I'm going to play it like an 8th note. So that third beat would be two 8th notes. So it would be 1, 2, and then the 16th note, the 4 16th notes. They show you how it's played. 1 and 2 and 3. And that's how those would be played. So the question comes in, why don't they just write the rhythm that way? And one college professor explained it to me that all ornaments are optional. You can leave them out. If they're causing you problems, if you're playing Bach and you can't get them, well, you leave them out because they are. I could play the line there for the appoggiatura, this line, just fine. I don't need those ornaments. But if you can put them in, you put them in. Changes it a lot, in my opinion. Now the second one is the tricky one. This is the one a lot of people get incorrectly, but most people do agree. If it is a triplet or a triple type rhythmic feel, like you hear 3/4 time, and they have that here. The grace note actually gets the length, most of the length. So you would play the grace note like a quarter note, and then you'd play the dotted quarter note like an eighth note. The line without the grace note is this: 1 and 2 and 3. That's how it is. But with the grace note, it's 1 and 2 and 3, and that's how that's interpreted. That's used quite a bit, and most people get it wrong. They just play it like a type thing, or worse, they'll play it like a grace note. And that's not the way this ornament is played. On 3/4 time on a appoggiatura, the little note gets most of the length. And here we're doubling it. Or you could just leave it out, it's optional. At the top of page 150, they talk about a turn. A turn is a group of notes centered around the note shown, more or less. For instance, in the first line, there is a turn, a little turn, that's the sign for a turn, above the E. E is here. The notes around it is the F and the D, so I'm going to involve these 3 notes, and I'm just going to play those notes as shown. That's a turn. So it's played 1, 2. Notice I started on the note above the E, because I'm turning around the E, and when the turn is shown above the note itself, the turn is, I start the turn above the E, so that's what I started on. 1, 2, 3. Now they're showing a type in slow baroque, which I guess you could do that too if is here is to play it evenly. So you see, in baroque music they didn't have a triplet symbol. You couldn't do 3 notes with a 3. They didn't have triplets. They didn't have a way of indicating 5 notes evenly like we do today with 5 notes and you put a 5, or 7 notes or 9 notes. They didn't have any of that. So they had to write out the music elsewhere, and you interpret it this way. So it's written this way, but you play it evenly. You have an inverted turn, which is simply flipping it upside down. So rather than here, it's this way. You just turn it the other way. You can see examples of that. And then finally, the last set is where the turn is not on the note, it's in between 2 notes. And when it's in between 2 notes, you'll play the first note, and then you'll turn, and then go to the next note. So it's here. Now, in this example, they put a sharp sign above the turn. See, they can add accidentals even in here. They're sneaky. And it simply means that the note you play above the note shown, you got to sharp it. So we're going to play an F sharp instead of an F, and that's what that's for. And we put the turn in between the 2 notes. But the third beat comes on the beat, so you have to stick it in between them. 1, 2, 3. Or, look at the last example. We have an E, then we have a turn with the sharp sign under it. So we're going to do an F natural, because there's no sharp sign above it, it's just under it. But we're doing the D sharp instead of a D. And the turn is the... And there's different rhythmic ways of doing this. It's not just what they're showing. There's other ways of doing it rhythmically. I could go... Or I could run them all together. Type thing. People will interpret it slightly differently. There's nothing wrong with what they've done. I just need you to understand there's more than one rhythmic way of playing that. It's not just that way. Then finally, at the bottom of page 150, they introduce the trill. I hate trills. I can't trill. I've never been able to trill. Ugh. I have really tried. But the fingers they just don't work. Again, different teachers I've had have taught trills differently. Here they're explaining you, well, it depends on the style of the music or the time period of the music or whatever, and how do you start the trill on the note or the note above it. And the two notes you're trilling are the two notes in the scale you're in the key you're in. For instance, if I'm in D major here, two sharps, and I want to trill an E, I have an E with a trill above it, I'm going to trill between the E and the F sharp because the F sharp's in the key of D major. Like so. If I were in the key of C major and I had an E, I would trill an F natural because F natural's in the key of C major. So you're trilling the note in the key it's in. If they want a different note, they'll put a little accidental there telling you that it's a different note, to alter the note. And there are different symbols for trills. You see at the beginning is TR, that's fine. At the bottom of the page, they call it a mordant, but it's also called a trill. That little squiggle thing. You can take that squiggle thing and spread it out so it's a long squiggle thing. That's another symbol for trill. You'll see that too. Different symbols there. Now, as far as executing them, trill can also be called a shake. And a shake is basically this type thing. I don't like them. I don't teach them. I don't play them that way. All the trills I've done and how I was taught to do it was always rhythmically. And how fast you go is based on you, but even Chopin said it doesn't have to be fast, it's got to be controlled and even. So look at the first example. They have the half note, and there's no key signature shown, so there's no sharps or flats, so we're going to trill between a D and an E. Try and go at least to 16th notes, because if you do 8th notes, that's really slow. But if you go, it's a 1, 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E. Now, they're showing it's played and broke with the upper note first. And I've been trying to figure out and read and study, and why is this, and I still don't have it answered yet. Why are some trills, people insist they're played with the note shown first, start on that note. It's like the second example. It's played in classical, they're saying do that. I had a professor, a piano professor in college, and the one who actually had the most effect on how I interpret things. And he insisted that I start all trills on the upper note. And it didn't matter what the style or time period the music was. I played Dochnani, who's a 20th century composer. And his trills, we started on the upper note. It was just upper note all the time. It was very seldom that it had to do, maybe because of the music and what was happening in the music, where I had to start the trill on the note. But otherwise, I always was required to start the trill on the upper note. Now, he's the only one that did that. Other teachers went with the style of music or the time period, where in the Baroque and classical you would do upper note, and when you get to the Romantic and beyond, it would be on the note. It would change that way. The problem with that is there was a lot of Romantic composers who did not like that, and they continued to play their trills on the upper note. Chopin being one of them. He wanted his trills, he was very clear about it, he wanted them starting on the upper note. When you read the letters from his students, what they would describe what the lesson was and what they learned, and that's where you pick that stuff up. So it's interesting. There's a disagreement on trills, which note it starts on. You'll decide on your own which note it's going to start on. So they have different examples there on trills and how they're played. In the middle of the page on 151, look at the last line. There's 4 lines there shown. Look at the 4th line there, where it's slow Baroque, and they're playing this trill with 4 notes, like so. And then the second trill, because it's longer, they got more time to play it. And they put a turn after it. Well, better talk about that. When I get a TR like that, I always start it on the upper note anyway. A lot of people don't. They'll just play it more like a mordant, which is shown at the bottom of the page. Some of them, if you can trill fast enough, you can go more than that. But I start them on the upper note, and I don't finger him with just 2 fingers. I will use 3 or 4 fingers to finger them. In the third line, it's the first one. If I started on the upper note, I'm going to play 4 notes, but I'm not going to finger it with just 2 fingers. I'm going to finger it out 3, 1, 3, 2. Is how I was taught to do it. Because I can do that more quickly and with more control than just using 2 fingers. And there's other combinations where you can use 3 different fingers to trill, short trills. Now if you have a long trill, look up on Arthur Rubinstein, and I forget the lady's name. There was a famous pianist, first half of the 20th century. All of her trills were done with 4 fingers, not 2. It was like a 3, 1, 4, 2, or in some combination of that. Maybe she started 4, 2, 3, 1. But you have to practice that to the point where it sounds like 2 fingers are doing it. But there's videos on YouTube showing her playing, and Arthur Rubinstein too. He did it both ways, where they would use 4 fingers to trill. And that's okay, but it's got to be even. So at the bottom of the page we finally get to mordents. Mordents are short trills, and they're basically played just on the beat. You have an inverted mordent that shows you its second line. It's got a line through it, and that's on the beat, and it's played like the other mordent. It's just now the example they show here is with a G, but the mordent has a sharp under it. That's where I say in trills, you use the next note in the key signature as your other note, but they can introduce accidentals there too. So here they did that. They want you to do the G, F, G, but they want the F to be sharped. It's like on the first example of the page, they have a D. You're going to trill between the E and the D, but they could put a sharp or a flat. Let's say they put a flat above the trill, and that would indicate, instead of an E, use an E flat. And that's how they can do these. You can alter the notes in a trill slightly with accidentals. Now on exercise 11.3, we get some of these ornaments, and again, you'll have to interpret them as you see fit. A lot of music will do what they do here. They'll write out the rhythm for the ornament in little notes above the staff or below the staff if it's the bottom staff. So you can see how the editor is suggesting how you play it. Of course, different editors will suggest different things, so that's just their opinion. You still have to decide, is that really how I want to play it? So at the beginning of this piece, in the first measure, there is no ornament. In the second measure, it looks like there's a little line through that note, making it a grace note. So I would interpret it, I would play it on the beat very quickly. But a lot of people would interpret it as playing it right before the beat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. But I do it 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you'll have to decide which way you're going to go. Just make sure it's a very quick little note. In this style of music, you would not play them at the same time. We're getting into 20th century type music when you start doing that kind of stuff more. Now, third measure with the turn. That's fine. That's not the only rhythm you could use, but that works. That's fine. The point is, the 3/4 time we want to hear the B on the first beat and the D on the second beat. 1, 2, 3. It's very quick. And this is a minuetto type tempo, or it's like a waltz. And so it's not fast, but it's not real slow either. So that turn's got to happen very quickly. And I would finger it, well, just like they're fingering it there. Yeah, finger it the way they're showing you. This is very common for turns. I finger most of my turns this way, where it's a 4, 3, 2, 1. You just, that's all it is, except the thumb is underneath. Takes a little practice, but you'll get it. In this case, the turns are very quick. And then in the next measure with these two little notes, I play them as 16th notes on the beat. So it's 1 E and a 1 E and a. Some people will play them, interpret them more like grace notes, where they'll play them very quickly before the beat. I don't agree with that at all, because there's a way of notating these things in music. When you have these little notes like this, and there's a bar line there, if you want them before the beat, they'll put the little notes in front of the bar line. And if they're in front of the bar line, that means you play them before the beat. But when they come after the bar line, to me that means they're played on the beat. Now, some people don't agree with that, but that's how I do it. So that measure would be 1 E and a 2, 3. Same thing with the next measure, because that little note does not have a slash through it. This is an appoggiatura, so I'm going to play it like a 16th note. So that beat is actually going to be 4 16th notes. 1 E and a 2, like so. If I play it without it, it's... But when I put it in with 4 16th notes, it's the effect. Now when we get to measure 6, again, I don't see any slash between that note on measure 6, so I would play that as like a 16th notes. They would all be 16th notes. Now on the next measure, measure 8, again, I think there's a slash there, so it's like a grace note. Some people would play that before the beat. I still play them on the beat. You do what you think is right. So the measure 7 and 8 is here. That's how a lot of people would play it. I would play it this way. Then we're good until we get to measure 12. Look at this. We got 3 little notes, 32nd notes. Here, G natural. Some people, as I said before, will play these before the beat, so the G would come on the beat. So if I play the measure before it, it's... I play it on the beat, so it would be this way. Measure 13, again, we're back to the 16th notes. And again, the next measure is 16th notes. Watch the fingering here if you're going to play this. Now measure 13. I really don't care for their fingering in the right hand here, because to me this is awkward. Those grace notes are going to be played like 16th notes here. They're not really grace, they're appoggiaturas is what they are. But they would be starting with the 4th finger on the E, and then 2nd finger. But now look what we got, a C sharp, G sharp, and that puts your thumb here. But then on the next note you have that this little note again, the appoggiatura with 4th finger, and that crunches your way up here, and you're in this, and then going, I don't like that at all. So I would suggest if you play this, the fingering you use is on measure 13, start with 5th finger on that, and then use 3rd finger on the quarter note B. So it's here. And now you can come 4, 2, and now you can do the 4th finger easily. And again, that last measure, look out, because they put another appoggiatura in there, and this time it's a quarter note. So we're in 3/4 time. That means the quarter note is actually going to get most of the length. So it's going to get like a half note length, and the dotted half note, it just gets a quarter note. And that's how that is. 2, 3. And that's how that rhythm goes. If you left it out, then it's just... But when you put it in, it's... A style thing they're not telling you about, I don't think. Look at the next to the last measure where you have the trill, and then they put a little turn at the end. They put those little notes, that's basically a turn, because you're here, and then you type thing. You have to judge how many notes you're playing in the trill to kind of make it all blend together. It was a style back in the 1700s that if you did a trill, you almost always ended it with a turn. Whether it wouldn't necessarily be in the music. In fact, a lot of times the trill itself wouldn't even be indicated. It would be the performer was interpreting it, and they would add the ornaments as they saw fit. But the style was, if you did a trill, you ended it with a turn. It was just there, you just did it. A lot of music anymore, because we're so exact, you play it exactly as written, we don't interpret so much, that if the turn isn't written in, we generally don't include it. But you will find a lot of players, a lot of pianists and teachers who will add the turn at the end even though it's not written in the music, just so you understand it's there. Okay.